Exam 4, Essay 1. Today we're talking about the kidneys. So just to give a brief explanation, the kidneys, we'll just draw this. They're going to filter what's in our blood through fenestrations. So enable stuff to come in, and then as it passes through the membrane, stuff can be reabsorbed or secreted. And then as it makes its way down into the urine, it's called excretion. Okay, so the first thing we're going to talk about is reabsorption. Okay, here we go. So just to give us a quick diagram, if this is the glomerulus, it comes down and then back up and over. So right here, we're in the proximal tubule. This is a convoluted proximal tubule. So as things move in, this is going to be the urine side, and this is the basal side, or the blood side. So there's going to be a blood vessel here, and this way will be to the bladder, I mean. Okay, so sodium is a super important transporter here as we talk about some different things. The first thing, sodium's almost always going to come in. We're going to secrete H pluses. Then we also have a sodium glucose symporter. We have a sodium and an amino acid symporter. Then we also have HCO3 minus can't pass through, but it mixes with hydrogens to become CO2 and water, which can then readily pass through the membrane, and it can form HCO3 minus again inside the cell, which gets pumped out. Along with sodium coming back in. Actually, yeah. Okay. So that's in the convoluted tubule. We also have water moving. We have aquaporins, as well as in between the cells, water is going to be able to move. Water is going to take with it calcium and potassium, and what is called something with the water. Like drag. Anyways, so then as we move down into the straight proximal tubule, here's where we're going to absorb chloride. So chloride is going to come in, and an anion is going to come out. So then we're also still going to pump out H pluses and pump in sodium. As always, on all of these cells, we have a sodium-potassium pump. On here, we got some potassium and chloride channels, right? But now this H plus and anion will bond and then be able to float back through into the cell. As soon as we continue down, we get the descending tubule. So all that's going to move here is water. Water's going to move. And obviously we still have the sodium-potassium pump. But the main purpose of this is water reabsorption. Then as we move to the ascending tubule, this is going to start reabsorbing, oops, sorry, that's terrible, some salts. We have what's called the sodium potassium 2 chloride channel. All those are going to come in the cell. And then we have macula densa cells. And macula densa cells are special because they have sodium chloride channels, syn-porters, and if these can send signals to the afferent pathway if there's not enough blood. And so then as we move down, to the collecting tubules, there's multiple types of cells. We have our primaries, and then we have, well, that's terrible. Okay, so in our primary cell here, we have embedded in these pockets. Gosh, I can't remember what anything's called today. Vesicles. Inside these vesicles, we have aquaporin channels. So if a G protein here comes along and signals from ADH, this will cause aquaporin channels to form here, which allows water to move through the cell. Because once we get into these later ones, we've lost this intercellular space. The macula densa, as well as our ascending tubule, water is no longer allowed to move through this space. And so if for some reason the body needs to absorb more water, it's going to send ADH and open up these aquaporin channels so that water can move through. And then the other thing that can happen is we have ENaC channels here. And as always, we have our sodium potassium pump. What can happen here is aldosterone can send a signal to the nucleus and make more sodium potassium channels. And if this happens, more sodium will be reabsorbed. Okay, so I'm gonna now move on, talk about two concepts in reabsorption called renal threshold. And this is how much the kidney can reabsorb before saturation. So this is the value when saturation is reached. Saturation is when there's too much of a solute to reabsorb it, which leads to excretion. So now real fast, we're just going to talk about how filtration works. So if this is a glomerulus, here, and this is our capsule, what's going to happen is we're going to have a hydrostatic pressure of about 55, and then we're going to have a B cup of about 30, and then we're going to have a negative 10 capsule pressure. Out here. So in total, the pressure 55 minus 30 minus 10 is equal to 25. So our net pressure 25 out, or you could say into the capsule. So stuff is going to be pushed in. So about 20% of cardiac output comes here, and then about 20% of that actually gets filtered. And so what's happening here is there's these little holes here called fenestrations. And then there's a basal membrane, which also has some holes in it. And so both of these are negatively charged. So to be filtered, they have to be small to fit in the fenestrations, the holes. They have to be non-polar or positive. Or for something like chloride, it's just so small that it can fit through and isn't repelled by those negative forces. And so those are the kinds of things that are going to filter it. So real fast, I'm going to talk about GFR. This is glomerulus filtration rate. So we want to measure how much is being filtered and how much is being reabsorbed. So the glomerulus filtration rate is saying how much of the thing is being filtered, how quickly. So we use something called clearance to help us. We say UC times V over PC. So this is concentration of the substance in the urine, concentration of it in the plasma, and then this is here's the V represents rate. So we use something called clearance of inulin. It's not insulin, inulin. It's a substance that's filtered, not reabsorbed. So we can test how fast this goes in and out of a system, and then we can compare it to the GFR. Sometimes we'll use the clearance of creatinine. And this is also filtered and not reabsorbed. It's actually slightly secreted, but it's so close, it also is comparable to GFR. This is typically as a value of 130 milliliters per second. I don't know. Concentrations cancel. Yeah, so it's just a rate, milliliters per time. And so GFR is typically 125. So if these values are close, it tells you that the GFR is normal. So with this blood vessel, we can regulate it using afferent and efferent tactics. So efferent is after the glomerulus, afferent is before. So we can get signals from our macula densa cells, NO, or we can receive adenosine. So this is going to cause vasodilation, and this is going to cause vasoconstriction. So typically, vasoconstriction is going to cause an increase in hydrostatic pressure. However, in this case, it's going to cause a decrease in hydrostatic pressure. And then here we're going to get an increase in hydrostatic pressure. So if for some reason the macula densa cells don't sense not enough sodium chloride, it's going to send NOH, which will increase the pressure, which will then increase GRF. So I also have other ways to adjust the efferent in similar cells, but also as well as with angiotensin II and other vasodilators and vasoconstrictors. In this case, if we increase here, we're going to decrease hydrostatic pressure. It's going to leave faster. But if we vasoconstrict, we're going to increase hydrostatic pressure. And so any of these methods can be used to regulate the amount of blood as well as the tubuloglomerular feedback, which is this. So another way to help register the kidneys is with renin. So if the kidneys sense too little, they can release renin into the blood. And renin changes angiotensinogen into angiotensin 1. Angiotensin 1 will travel through the blood to the lungs. In the lungs is an enzyme called ACE, the angiotensin changing enzyme. And ACE will turn angiotensin 1 into angiotensin 2. So angiotensin does a lot of things. One, it's a vasoconstrictor. Next, it can send a signal through the blood to the adrenal medulla, which will release aldosterone. So we talked about aldosterone a little earlier. I find it here that it will cause more sodium to be reabsorbed. Angiotensin can also trigger ADH release from the pituitary glands in the brain. It also increases our desire for water and salt. So all those things mixed together is how renin can regulate those things. So ADH can also be regulated by the ROS system, which was the one we just went through, but it can also be done by baroreceptors. So baroreceptors will send a neuron to the pituitary gland, which will release ADH. However, if the baroreceptors are stretched, it will send an inhibitory signal. And if they aren't stretching, it'll send a positive signal to release more ADH. And the other thing is osmoreceptors. So near a blood vessel, these receptors will sense the osmolarity. So let's say the osmolarity increases. That means we need to absorb more water. So water is going to leave this space, leave the interstitial space to level out with this and create an equilibrium. This will send a signal down to the pituitary gland, which will then release ADH into the blood. When ADH releases the system, it releases aquaporins into the membrane through the vesicles and causes more water absorption. So last thing to talk about is the concentration gradient. So I'm going to draw two that's not good enough. Let's draw this one way down. Okay, so here we have a juxtamedullary nephron. This one we have a cortical nephron. So in here we have this gradient that is established. And is established actually through our channels. Okay, so just to give a value, up at the top it's about 300 osmolar. So what happens is, after we pass through the proximal tubules, we get the descending tubule, where water is going to be absorbed into the blood. When water is absorbed into blood, it's going to increase the gradient. So now we're getting 400, 500, 600, and 600 is about the max that the sodium chloride can maintain. After this, we need something called urea. So urea is going to leave okay, you get the point. Urea is going to urea is non-permeable, or is permeable, but also not metabolized. So what happens is urea is going to pass out into this interstitial space, and it's going to increase the gradient even more, 700, 800, 900, until we get to about 1200. So most of the gradient in a cortical nephron is established by the sodium chloride gradient, but then later the urea is the reason for the gradient. So what's happening here is salt and water absorbed here, maintaining this, but then in the descending tubule, only water is absorbed, which increases the gradient. There's no lymphatic system. So 90% is reabsorbed, which means 10% remains and establishes a gradient. So then, as we talked about, if we're looking inside the tubule, concentration 300 here, it gets down to 600 here, and then all the way up here it's about 100 as it comes down in here. And it will remain that way as it goes out to the urine unless those primary cells are activated, and it causes release of water here as well. Water reabsorption through the aquaporin channels through means of ADH. So depending on if water is going to be reabsorbed, we can get higher gradients. So our urine concentration is determined highly by this aspect right here, by the ADH, the aquaporin channel. So if the person is well hydrated, urine will have about 100 or 150 millismolar, but then when they're dehydrated, it can go all the way to 1200 millismolar. So the urine concentration is going to increase because more water is going to be absorbed. Okay, I believe that's everything. Perfect. Thanks, Aaron.